Welcome to Minding Men. My name is Brian Pollock, and today we have Riley Nickols, PhD, CEDSC. He's a counseling and sports psychologist who specializes in working with athletes to address mental health and performance concerns through his private practice, Mind Body Endurance. Don't forget that name. He's in person, he does virtual services across 46 different states due to licensing allowance, which is wonderful. And he's also this program advisor for Athletes Edge at ED Care in Denver, Colorado, where he specialized in intensive eating disorder treatment, providing for athletes. Dr. Nickols is a member of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committees, the Relative Energy Deficiency in Sport Expert Panel, and he's listed in the US OPC's Mental Health Registry. Dr. Nickols, welcome to Minding Men.
Thanks for having me, Brian. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that's quite a resume. You definitely have dedicated, particularly focused on your career between sports psychology and, Reds. Sometimes it falls into the world of eating disorders. How did you end up here? What was your story? What inspired you?
Yeah, I think like a lot of us really have an affinity and passion for sports in general and played growing up. I had aspirations as a left-handed pitcher and had aspirations to play in college, and that was kind of the plan. Senior year of high school, I had a shoulder injury that disallowed me to play
Oh,
and a corresponding surgery. 2 weeks before heading into college, I went into college in a sling and really tried to rehab and come back from that, but inherently was unable to do so. So essentially, it was a career-ending surgery. That was
wow.
really impactful for me personally, just from an identity standpoint and having to hit the eject button far earlier than I would have liked. And it just affected me in many ways. And I thought going through it, I didn't have a sports psychologist or someone to speak to, but just thought it would be lovely to be able to provide support for athletes in the context of injury and then other areas of well. So that kind of catapulted me to change majors and then move forward in this area.
That's amazing. So you kind of became the person you needed in those moments.
Yes, I was lucky to have a lovely support system, family and otherwise, but really would have benefited, I think, from seeing and talking to someone and working through stuff.
Yeah, I love that. One of I've been talking a lot with some of the athletic departments here in New Jersey, and there's a big need with mental health and sports injury that we're seeing quite a bit, and nobody really knows how to handle it. People don't know where to go. You know, uh, where does somebody start when they're getting injured and let's say they broke their collarbone or their leg or their arm, and you're talking 3, 4 months, maybe the whole season they're out and they're used to eating a certain way, preparing, practicing, really have a certain output, and now they're stuck.
Mm. Yeah, it's a great question, and I think when you think about injury in general, especially in the context of sport, it affects in many ways from an identity lens. That athlete identity is really salient and can be a wonderful aspect of one's identity. That can feel kind of threatened at the moment because you're not actively maybe able to participate in sport in ways you like. There's just the connectedness. Sometimes injuries are quite isolating. Athletes are usually around their teammates and coaches pretty regularly, and usually in the context of an injury, they have a modified sport participation or none at all for a while to heal. So that can be really impactful. There's fears of will I regain my fitness and performance after this injury heals? It's very common and understandable. Sometimes the injury itself was traumatic. And so there's just that reality too, oftentimes to work through. And then, yeah, a huge shift in terms of schedule and being maybe as structured as most athletes are in the context of sport, and just energy demands massively shifting as well, just to modified sport participation. So it's really multifaceted. But all that to be said, there's a normative response to an injury for athletes, of course, and then there's more of a response that's more pathological, interfering in quality of life and mood behaviors, and that's where I think maybe the more professional support would be beneficial and needed in the context of that response.
That's wonderful points. It's when that stuff happens, particularly one thing you really point out was the isolation, the change of routine, really the need to kind of find a modified identity, not like fully changing who they are, but their identity is all of a sudden being somewhat challenged because their modus of operating has been shifted. You're an eating disorder expert, and that's how I know you over the years or know of you. I'm really lucky to be able to have this time to talk to you. Where do you see that compensation or that change start to take place in athletes as this kind of piece takes shape from injury or needing to sit on the sidelines?
Yeah, I think there's protective aspects, many in the context of sports. So you think about the eyes on you, whether it's coach, athletic trainer,
Mhm.
you have a team oftentimes, depending on the level of play, and that's wonderful and protective. And also, too, in the context of injury, that can happen also. But I always feel that athletes have the best of intentions always, and sometimes those intentions are quite misguided, right? So I think work with a lot of athletes that maybe have bone stress injuries and for higher impact sports like running. And instead of not being able to maybe run, they reallocate kind of that time to cross train for the same amount of time as running. And that's, I think, well intended, but also too a bit misguided for a variety of reasons. And so I think there maybe is an overemphasis on fortifying fitness in certain ways that they can, or being more restrictive with intake. Again, it comes from a good place, but as we know, those are really precursors and vulnerabilities to slide in a state of low energy availability or relative energy deficiency in sport, which of
Yeah.
course is a catalyst and a precursor to a more diagnosable eating disorder thereafter. So it's kind of a cascade of, and there's always a mood component, as you're aware, with these eating concerns too. So those are all at play.
That's wonderful. It's interesting you're outlining the relative energy deficiency, and you're also talking a little bit about how there's this mood piece, and when you start to see this, the protective factor of reducing intake and making sure our body doesn't change, we can never blame anybody for this. This is not something that is somebody trying to hurt themselves or trying to prove a point. It really is out of protection and safety seeking often. And you outlined REDS, relative energy deficiency syndrome, and how that leads to something like a more bona fide eating disorder. Um, I always saw REDS as the stepping stone to something more serious. Where does somebody start to say, okay, I'm not having enough? First off, what is REDS, right? We'll get there in half a second. And then where does it cross a line where it's, this is actually worse or getting worse, shall I say, into something more bona fide like an eating disorder?
Yeah, REDS is a kind of a prolonged state of low energy availability, meaning our bodies have energy needs on the daily, and unintentionally, those energy needs maybe are not met. And the cumulative effects of not meeting energy needs, is really impactful from days and weeks and months of missing those energy needs. And so athletes can unknowingly fall into this state of low energy availability, which affects brain and body and systems of the body pretty notably and over at some point. And so over time, there oftentimes in that state, there's increased mental health concerns, whether it's OCD, PTSD symptoms, depression, anxiety, OCD. And then also too, there oftentimes is increased rigidity in terms of food choices and eating patterns and or exercise. And I think that oftentimes that rigidity becomes interfering just in terms of socially, interfering in terms of health implications, interfering socially. And I always think about all these diagnoses and syndromes. It's the degree of interference that one experiences in their functioning and quality of life. I think that is most impactful and salient.
You heard it here, everyone. No joke. It becomes clinical as it gets more intense and more life interfering. It's the isolation, the avoidance, the anger, the assertive nature to not participate or to obsess over something. And we're missing the key moments of our lives that it starts to get really clinical. Do you know of places or shall I say resources people can find online? Of course, mindbodyendurance.com. Is it .com?
Yeah. Yep.
.com and other places where somebody who is worried about REDS, they should be getting there for signs, symptoms, information.
Yeah. Project Reds is a good one as well. That's a great resource. My colleague and esteemed dietitian Becca McConville has like a Reds kind of master class. NEDA, National Eating Disorder Association, has really wonderful resources as well.
Mhm.
for Reds, and the U.S. Olympic Committee also has pretty robust resources and information too. And also like there's the International Olympic Committee published a consensus statement on Reds that's
Mm.
available. It's a PDF that's quite helpful with graphics in terms of how it can affect the brain and body. The one thing, just a distinction to make, is that usually for athletes that have a Reds presentation with knowledge and feedback from qualified professionals, mental health provider, sport
Mhm.
dietitian, sometimes physician. With that feedback, there can be sometimes change pretty immediately
Yeah.
and consistently, and it takes some time to plow out of that state. The distinction between eating disorders and Reds is that that knowledge is necessary, but oftentimes not sufficient. And we athletes with more of an eating disorder presentation are absolutely in a state of Reds,
Mhm.
but also times with that knowledge and the changes that need to occur to restore and optimize and fortify health, there's oftentimes internal distress,
Yeah. Yeah.
anxiety and fear, and kind of hurdles internally that disallow the ease and efficiency for those changes to occur.
Yeah, wonderful points, and I like to often think of Reds as you can get out of this. Don't have to make it worse. It
Sure.
doesn't have to be long term. It's a bit more, shall I say, salvageable to get back to a stabilized point,
Yep.
which is what you were just saying, which is wonderful. Are you seeing Reds in mainly adults or younger, adolescent, teen ages? Where are you really seeing the mix now?
That's a great question. I mean, I think it goes without saying any mental health condition or syndrome can affect any demographic, of course. I do think just anecdotally in my practice, I see more adolescents and young adults. And if you think about it just from a developmental standpoint, it's a rapid time of development at
Yeah.
at those ages, late adolescence, early adulthood. And I think, and if that demographic is playing sport too, just the energy needs and demands are just through the roof. And so I think there's a lot of athletes that unintentionally just maybe underestimate their energy needs. And also, if you think about the level of play in terms of club sport, high school, club to
Yes.
college to professional, if you think about the training demands,
Yes.
um, they just intensify as you go up levels of play. And so you can really see sometimes the vulnerability there across the board for those athletes kind of that are really driven and motivated to say the least, but unintentionally maybe underestimate their energy needs or don't consistently meet energy needs throughout that time frame.
Fair. I love that. I have to admit, the world of club and travel sports, I think, has intensified the mental health and, let's say, the intake picture of food and body connection. It's gotten worse and worse and more. Do you see this intensity with more males? Do you see it with more females? What is or both, like or in between? Where the gender spectrum are you seeing this show up?
I mean, I think it transcends genders. Yeah, I do think unfortunately there is this I don't know, normativeness with parents and culture and sport to have early sport specialization that we
Yeah.
see, and it just makes us as providers cringe. And because we know there's well-founded research on the implications from a mental health standpoint, from just a burnout standpoint,
Yeah.
when kids specialize really at a really young age. And there's this maybe worry or fear as parents and caregivers who are all well intended that if my kiddo does not play year round soccer or whatever it might be, it might fall behind, and miss
Yeah.
out. And so I do think it just is a really vulnerable state, not just for family systems where they orbit around child's kind of schedule and sports schedule year round, and there's no break or no downtime, but of course for the athlete as well.
Yeah, developmentally, physically, if you're training your body to do one thing, it becomes vulnerable to everything that could happen in other sports or other experiences, and that's where you see easy fractures and breaks and other things. Speaking, I did a Minding Men episode early on with Colleen Hacker. Do you know Colleen?
Yeah.
She's wonderful. And for those of you who are listening and don't know her, she was on, I believe, on the U.S. Olympic Committee at some point. She's part of USA Hockey. She was Mia Hamm's like personal coach for when they won the gold, the women's soccer team. She's wonderful, and she shows a ton of research about the developmental experience of adolescents and teenagers, as their bodies are still growing, and that specialization actually stunts people's abilities to keep going. And the issue too, I think a lot of times I see is the pressure for these kids. One of the reasons we won't get into the parents today, but well, the whole experience, because they mean well, but is that there's the pressure to play in high school and then the pressure to be in college. And so if you don't start at 5, 6, and you aren't pushing and pushing, you all of a sudden will not be successful in your sport, where we actually know that's not true. Plenty of people show up at 13, 14 playing baseball or hockey's a tough one, but football, other sport, and they're fantastic. So
Sure.
it's a big piece, but if we're not feeding ourselves, it absolutely gets worse and worse. Um, as we were talking about this, you, before videoing, you had mentioned that you're seeing more adolescent males. I am too. Is it because we're males? Maybe, possibly. But we're getting a lot of calls here at Hilltop as well. Um, and sometimes I wonder where the heck is that coming from? What is it? And over the past 10 years or so, it's
Mm.
gotten, I've been in this practice, I've been doing this for more than 10 years, but in this practice for about 9.5 to 10 years. Where do you see the influences coming from?
Yeah, I think like a lot of things, it's probably multifactorial, I'm sure, like everything. I think perhaps maybe being a male provider that like maybe attracts maybe a disproportionate amount of males, maybe perhaps. I don't know. That's one hypothesis. I'd also think that, we've come a long way in our country too for just mental health awareness. And so I do think that has been really helpful for people accessing care for themselves, for loved ones, especially in the sport world. Athletes like Kevin Love and others have been pretty vocal about their own struggles. So I think that's a really powerful tool for individuals and males to get care in a more timely way. As we know, the research shows that males are less likely to utilize healthcare services comparatively to females, and I think the same goes true for mental health. But there has been an uptick. Does that mean there are more mental health concerns now as compared to 15 years ago? I don't know. We can make speculative
Yeah, we
guesses
don't have the
on that.
numbers to
Yeah.
know that. It's so hard. And the people where we get the real numbers from are in clinics and hospitals. So how do we know what's actually happening?
Mhm.
I agree with you. There is an uptick. I think that there is more of a social media uptick that's affecting people in terms of how they want to be, what they want to look like, what sports performance should encompass. I won't say exact companies, but when people are making the perfect shot every time and they're making crazy shots, there's this obsession of wanting to get that validation. Um, everything's on TV. I have a kid who plays hockey. Literally, if I can't go to the game, I go straight to the videotape and watch it live, and I can record every single assist or goal or great or
Sure.
bad play he does. And I think these kids are being monitored and watched way more than ever before in terms of living up to these mental health standards. Um,
Yeah.
I'm thinking you probably see that too.
Yes, very much. And I think as a psychologist and mental health provider, like I do think it's important to understand social media usage. Who are you following? What kind of images and messaging is that? And how does that make you feel as you're scrolling and or afterwards? And I think there's a lot of good with social media, but sometimes there can just perpetuate feelings of inadequacy, or the algorithms just feed us more of what we're interested in. And so I think a lot of most all athletes that I work with are extremely motivated, dedicated, driven. Perfectionism's off the charts, and not surprisingly, their algorithm is more like glorifying grind culture, right? Like it's just like be the first one to show up, the last one to leave, and it just feeds
Yeah.
that beast, right? And so I think as a coach and as a parent, your athlete or child's strengths, and I think it's really challenging with a lot of parents I work with, and their kids an athlete and really connects with that. They're not pushing at all. They're actually like, kid just love
Right.
sports, and actually the need is to pull them back appropriately in a loving way
Yes.
to have sustainability, right, and longevity in the sport. And that's a really, and coaches too, so you want to fuel that drive in a thoughtful way, but sometimes more is obviously not better, increases vulnerability and thereafter. So
Yes, 1,000%. Where have you seen success with what you just said
Mhm.
with coaches? How do you get them to recognize this stuff? Because coaches are so focused on performance and success and winning, rightfully so. But I find that coaches also, as much as they're aware, they miss key components of development of the player in
Yeah.
terms of mental health and let's say the full package per se, not just focusing on skill.
Yeah.
Have you had success with that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it sounds cliche, but I think the coaches that I've worked with, they view athletes as human beings first and foremost, and athletes very secondary. And so, as a human, you have human experiences and interact and reactions, of course. And I think being sensitive to that, I think coaches mean well, but sometimes there's this overly rigid, you can't miss any practices, or you
Right.
need to travel with us. And I think it's well intended, but just a bit misguided and perpetuates things as well. Coaches who know the science behind training. So
Mhm.
there's just well-founded sport physiology on periodized training. That's well-founded in the literature. I think at times, sometimes coaches love athletes who get in extra workouts, right? And like will almost reinforce that to the athlete and the team as well in front of other athletes. And my feeling is, and I have a bias here, but if and when an athlete deviates from the training that coach lays out, I don't know about you, but I've never met a coach who has undertrained their athletes. So that's just one.
Right.
Secondly, is when an athlete is getting in additional workouts that is not part of their training plan, their training is no longer periodized. So
Mm,
it blows up the periodization. So you can see where coaches like really try to reinforce things to athletes or their team, but actually it can be really misguided too and can just fly in the face of science if performance is the goal. And then the last thing I'll say is if you ask any coach or athlete, hey, how important is the psychological mental skills part of the game here of your sport? Every coach and athlete be like, oh, really important.
mhm.
What percentage of your practices do you spend focusing on developing those psychological skills? Most of the time it's like, not at all, right? Or
Right.
like, and it just is such a huge mismatch there too, from the emphasis on those physical skills, which are important. But by doing that, you neglect this other really salient piece of the game. And again,
Yeah.
as a sports psych, I'm biased in that, but there's just that reality, I think, too, that coaches would acknowledge often.
So often I say hockey IQ, hockey IQ. My
Mhm.
kid plays hockey. I used to sing, act, and dance for a living. I don't even know what hockey IQ looks like. But there's a piece of it where so much of what I've seen over years and what I see in other sports is very much on this idea of understanding the mental components of the game and finding places for these coaches to find the space to actually teach that. I don't see it available to them or resources available to them to a point where they're willing to dedicate that extra time because I think it's everyone's busy. Everyone knows the game. Everybody knows what sport they're teaching or they're doing, and they do it their way because they're trying to be successful in their best way that they can. And sometimes I wonder, you're dealing with higher level stuff. I'm sure you're dealing with colleges and you know the US Olympics and whatnot. When you look at other kind of let's say the lower level sports or with the up and comers per se who are they're learning the sport, it's really hard to find that commitment to that piece to the understanding how to read the room, how to read the plays, how to read the sports, how to anticipate what people might be thinking, and then also not to take everything like the mental game is also about rejection sensitivity and not
Mhm.
feeling as though you are, let's say you are the goalie on a soccer game and they keep scoring on you and you keep beating yourself up and that's actually causing way more problems. How do you find that mental capacity to strengthen your efficacy in those moments? So hard to do.
It really is. And a great resource for coaches is the Positive Coaching Alliance. It's a nonprofit. There's lots of wonderful resources in
Yeah.
terms of language and communication styles and leadership development and whatnot too. Um, but I agree. I do think like that all athletes and coaches are quite outcome focused for obvious reasons.
Mhm.
I do think that if and when there's a disproportionate amount of focus on those outcome goals, that's where problems occur, right? Because what if the outcome is not translating? And what if you are getting scored on, like in that example? The athletes who are perform most consistently at a high level really redirect their focus and attention to those process goals that, of course, align and support those outcome goals, but really anchor you back into your own process psychologically, attention, focus, physiologically. Where do you need to be to optimally function? You care about the outcome, but that's not where the focus is, right? Because if it is, it's going to be this roller coaster also from a confidence standpoint, from an
Yes.
anxiety standpoint as well.
Especially those isolating positions in all sports, where you're really on your own and it feels like the weight of the team, it could be on you in very given moments.
Yeah.
Really tough stuff. Um, I noticed, and we talked a bit about this, you and I share something similar professionally, which is that we're both certified eating disorder specialists and consultants who help train other people, and we're both males. I just need to ask, how many guys you think have that credential in the country?
That's a wonderful question. I don't know. I think there are males in the field, which when you it's kind of like a unicorn when you're at a at a
Right,
conference.
just that alone.
Hey, give high fives and stuff. I worked at intensive treatment, and I remember at that time there I was just it was pretty normal to be kind of the only male in a staff meeting, and that just became like normal to experience. I've come to find out it can be really an asset too, just given that more males are so sorely needed in the field from all physicians, dietitians, mental health providers, but there still is just a gap in kind of having male providers. I think too for a variety of reasons. I'm sure you do too. Have females who really are seeking out a male provider.
Yes.
Either haven't had a male provider before, or they have and maybe that connected and it felt salient. So like any profession, diversity is really important and critical and vital for the field to thrive. And so I think there's for those listening, if there is an interest in the field or understanding more, there's desperate need too.
Desperate. And I'm going to say a number and I'm wrong. So don't yell at me, certifying board. I think at our current place, even just certified eating disorder specialists in general, in terms of males, we're probably between 5 to 10 nationally.
Mm.
I
Wow.
really, I pray I'm wrong. May I be wrong? Please, I'm wrong. But I don't think there's many of us, and it's such a wild west for guys if they really want to learn how to help people find resilience and strength on a core level where food is so metaphorical and important to so many different aspects of our life and our connection with our brains and our bodies and our minds and how we function on a daily basis. We need more people like you, Riley. We
Mm.
just do. So thank you for being a part of this amazing focus and niche. And the fact that you're doing sports psychology in this, where I'll be honest, the language in sports psychology is so different than social work or psychology in general that I think you're probably super rare among all of us.
Mm.
So thank
Yeah,
you.
I feel I'm still learning a lot. I don't know about you, but the more you learn about something or anything, the more you realize how much you don't know. And so it's super humbling
Yeah.
also. Um,
Yes.
but it is a unique space to kind of dance between the world and the sport provider world and then the eating disorder world and kind of to oscillate back and forth. And there certainly is overlap between the two and trying to bridge them together, of course, is our collective goals. But it's not lost on me just the how lucky I feel to be passionate and to have the opportunities, to embark on that with colleagues such as yourself and others.
Well, we're honored to have you and be able to coordinate. And, everybody, Riley can be found at mindbodyendurance.com. You can look him up. He's on, I think, about 7,000 podcasts a year. And he's wonderful. He's smart. He knows his stuff. And we're just lucky and honored to have had you for 30 minutes.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate the work you're doing and look forward to being in touch here.
Absolutely. Thanks, Riley. And this has been an episode of Minding Men, everybody. And I hope that you look back and look at our previous episodes, but we're also going to be including more. I believe Jason Nagata is going to be joining us soon, as well as a few others from not only the eating disorder world, but also the psychology world about men, mental health, and how we can come together to build strength from within. Thank you.